Without taking anything away from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, it sort of overshadowed a battle which took place the following day, the 1941 Battle of Guam. While far fewer people lost their lives in the Battle of Guam, it was still a disaster for the United States, and it also set the stage for one of the best evasion stories of the Pacific War, if not all of World War II. In this video, we delve into the story of George Ray Tweed. To set the scene, the United States took Guam, the southernmost Mariana Island, from the Spanish in 1898. Probably, the indigenous Guamanians, the Chamorro, were somewhat used to outsiders messing with their little island at this point. By the time the Second World War kicked off, some 40 years later, the US military housed some naval and marine units on Guam. But overall, the island wasn't all that high up on their list of things to defend. With that said, by December 1941, US Navy Captain George McMillan, who was basically in charge of everything, had some US Navy, US Marine Corps, and local militia units at his disposal amounting to around 550 men, 1 minesweeper, and 2 patrol boats. Unfortunately, McMillan's force never really stood a chance against Imperial Japan, which bore down on poor Guam with nearly 6,000 troops and a small naval fleet, supported by an unknown number of Zeros. McMillan's minesweeper quickly fell prey to Japanese air attacks on the morning of December 8, 1941. The Japanese then proceeded to pummel Guam from the sky and sea, softening the island for troop landings, which took place on the 10th. Long story short, the island was in Japanese hands by the end of the day, with 406 of McMillan's men captured and a further 61 wounded or killed. While it's unclear what happened to some of the other military personnel who somehow avoided becoming casualty stats, at least 6 US Navy personnel managed to evade capture and/or death, at least for some time. As you might have guessed, our buddy George Ray Tweed was among them. George Ray Tweed was born in Oregon in 1902 and enlisted in the US Navy when he was 20 years old. But what really floated his boat were radio waves, so he went to radioman school and got damn good at it. In 1940, at the rank of radioman first class, he rocked up on Guam with his fam, working in the Navy communication office. A few months before the Japanese hit the island, Tweed's family bailed. When the enemy started shooting people and taking prisoners, Tweed said, "Stuff that," and fled into the jungle with his mate, Al Tyson. Over the next 2 years and 7 months, Tweed made things incredibly difficult for the Japanese, but also, it could be argued, for the Chamorro. You see, Tweed could never have survived without help, and the Japanese knew it. After chilling in the jungle for a bit, waiting for the gunfire to die down, Tweed and Tyson ran to a farm where they found another 4 fellow Americans in hiding. Sticking to the jungle near the farm, the 6 of them hid out for a few days, in which time the local farmers brought them water, food, and other supplies. Soon, other Chamorro learned about Tweed and his posse, and that knowledge eventually fell into Japanese hands. Unwilling to simply let the men live out their days in the Guam jungle, the Japanese employed hundreds of locals to search for the fugitives. When the search parties turned up nothing, the Japanese did what World War II era Japanese soldiers did best, and tortured the poor Chamorro for information on the Americans' whereabouts. With the enemy hot on their heels, the posse split up, with the OG duo of Tweed and Tyson, or TNT, sticking together. It was around then that the Japanese captured one of the farmers who had aided the Americans and, you guessed it, tortured him. At this point, TNT thought about turning themselves in, but were advised that doing so would be to forfeit their own lives. With this news, TNT bro-fisted, then went their separate ways. On his own now, much to the misfortune of Tyson and the other 4 fugitives, Tweed fled to a ranch and hid there for several days. During this time, one of the locals decided that Tweed didn't need water or food so much as a gat, equipping him with a pistol. But while Tweed may have completed his basic training, he knew of a weapon much mightier than the sword, the pen, which was, in this case, a typewriter. After leaving the ranch to set up a crib in a nearby cave, the Chamorros brought him a generator, a radio, and again, a typewriter. Being an expert radio man, Tweed figured out how to turn on the radio and set it to receive news broadcasts from the US mainland and even military broadcasts sent out by the United States Army forces in the Far East in the Philippines. But he didn't just sit there listening to fat beats and war talk. Using the typewriter, he started his own underground newspaper, which he deemed the Guam Eagle. The paper became a favorite among the Chamorros, who didn't really have a better source of news. When Tweed no longer felt that his cave was safe, he fled, but continued to receive support from the Chamorros for several months, despite the fact that the Japanese had placed a 1,000 yen bounty on his head, and despite the fact that it was the Chamorros facing his pursuer's wrath, and not him. If the Japanese suspected any Chamorro of assisting Tweed, they would torture and potentially execute them. Understandably, some Chamorros weren't all that into this, but many were willing to pay the price of Tweed's freedom. One of such men was the Catholic priest Father Jesus Bazar Dueñas, who the Japanese beat, tortured, and then beheaded, having suspected him of assisting Tweed. Through all of it, the priest didn't utter a word. To the Chamorros loyal to Tweed, he was a symbol of hope. Hope that the Americans would come back and liberate their island from its brutal occupiers. In a way, it was how they could contribute to the Allied victory. At some point during this time, Tweed received some terrible news. 3 of the Americans from his former posse had been captured and, like the priest, beheaded. Tweed let out his breath when he heard that Tyson was not among the dead. But that bad news was just around the bend, with Tweed finding out about Tyson's death soon after, along with the last remaining posse member. Out of the 6 men who had started out on that farm more than a year ago, Tweed was the only one left. Fortunately, he caught a break soon after when he was taken in by a wealthy Spanish landowner with whom he lived until July 1944. Tweed's story, however, isn't over. Just as the Chamorros hoped, the Americans came back to Guam and took their revenge upon the Japanese, crushing them in the 1944 Battle of Guam and liberating the island. And Tweed played an important role in this too, conveying information to US forces in the lead up to their invasion of the island with a pair of signal flags and a mirror. He was then rescued from a beach and went on to tell his fellow Americans everything he knew. For his bravery, Tweed was awarded the Legion of Merit. The citation read, "Courageous and resourceful under relentless stalking by the Japanese, radio electrician Tweed succeeded in escaping capture and with the aid of friendly and loyal natives managed to not only subsist during this prolonged, grueling period, but to obtain much valuable information concerning the Japanese occupation of the island, thereby making a vital contribution to the recapture of this strategic American possession." As always though, we're eager to hear what you think. Had you ever heard of George Ray Tweed before this video? Do you think he should have turned himself over to the Japanese, knowing full well that Chamorros were literally dying for him? Lastly, what do you think you would have done in that situation? Please let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And just before you're sucked deeper into that YouTube algorithm, I'm hoping to redirect you to our new channel called The Braved, where we go through all different eras of history and take a look at some of the most badass individuals from all these different eras, and it's edited in a really high quality way, even more so than this channel. So if that interests you, make sure you check out our weekly videos over on that channel, link in the description below. And also, don't forget to join us on our Patreon. If you do decide to donate, you get access to a behind the scenes Discord server where you can chat to myself and the entire team that run this channel, as well as a couple of exclusive videos posted on there with some more on the way. And lastly, if you just want to join our wider community, make sure you check us out on our Discord, Facebook, and Instagram, all which have exclusive posts you won't find on this channel. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope you learned something new.